Yours Isos here. Today we're going to be doing a guide for the Kamaitachi suit. This was released with the release of the game. It was not initially unlocked, but you could unlock it by coming to the suit vendor. And it is focused on melee combat. All its biolinks are linked to melee combat and a little bit of movement speed. So we'll be going over that in a sec. For too long didn't watch, the quick strikes improves melee combat quite well. If you want some utility slash movement speed, then Frenzy is the way to go. Gap Closer is actually pretty bad, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you already have quick strikes. But anyway, let's go and do a quick overview of them. Okay, so as always with Biolinks, these first three levels are just increases to the numbers. So strictly speaking, these end ones are better, and then this last one just allows you to start swapping it off. So first Biolink we got here is Frenzy. Increases movement speed by 30% for 4 seconds after destroying a trap or guard with a melee weapon. It's actually nowhere near as restrictive as this. Anything you destroy with a melee weapon, so that includes traps, guards, Harvey, projectiles, bombs, your own grappling hook, teammates, I'm pretty sure, they all give frenzy bonuses. Anything you destroy with your melee weapon will get you a frenzy bonus. It does specifically have to be with a melee weapon though. You can't shoot a bomb with a plasma bow and then get the bonus here. That doesn't work. The movement speed increases in this game are always additive. So if you had two 30% bonuses, you would have a 60% bonus, as opposed to if you were to multiply them together, you would end up with a 69% bonus. So if you stack this with the spike drive, you just add up the numbers and you can work out how fast you'll be moving. Next up, Gap Closer. Gap Closer increases the melee lunge range by 30%. Lunge range is a stat that is on both melee weapons currently, so you can just look it up, times it by 1.3, and you end up working out exactly how much the lunge range will be after that. And lastly, we have Quick Strikes. Increases the lunge speed by 45%. Lunge speed of both melee weapons currently is 15 meters per second, which is one of the fastest ways to move around the map in the game currently. Increasing that by 45% is honestly kind of insane, but we'll go into that in a second. Before I go into recommendations for biolinks to use, let's quickly go over what lunges are and how they work. So the way the lunge works, you start by getting within your lunge distance. You need to get to at least the maximum lunge distance before you can even make a lunge. You click the button, it does the lunge. The lunge sends you in a straight line straight towards whatever you've targeted, and when it gets close enough that it can swing, it will swing. So for Sledgeblade, the default lunge distance is 8 meters at level 3. Fury's Edge, the default lunge distance is 4.5 meters, and Sledgeblade will swing when you are 2 meters away, Fury's Edge will swing when you're 1.8 meters away. From that, we can work out exactly how long lunges are going to take, and importantly, if you're looking over the numbers on the screen at the moment, you'll notice that you're actually in that vulnerable state where you are rushing straight at your enemy for longer, for a larger percentage of time with Gap Closer than if you don't have Gap Closer. It actually means that you won't be able to parry, you won't be able to parry for longer, you won't be able to move to try and dodge things for longer, you can't react to anything for a longer amount of time if you take the Gap Closer perk Biolink. So, whereas the Quick Strike significantly reduces that time frame, which means that it's very good for that. So, when I'm talking about Gap Closer being like a double-edged sword, this is what I'm talking about. You can see all the numbers on the screen at the moment, and you'll notice that if you have both of them, it roughly evens out to roughly the same as base. So in this case, we are talking about fractions of seconds, but a fraction of a second could be the difference between you surviving an encounter and dying. So I think the Gap Closer is the only biolink currently that has a downside, and because of that, it can be fairly suspect. Okay, now let's just go over biolinks. Obviously, whenever you're selecting biolinks, you can choose 1, 2, or 3. If you're choosing 3, and this is the one case I would not always recommend choosing all 3 of these. So even if you are using dual melee, it may be worth swapping Gap Closer off. I'm not 100% on this. I think it could be a bit of personal preference, but it might actually be worth swapping Gap Closer off for nothing, so that you can minimize the time that you are vulnerable in a lunge. It does mean that it will be harder to like to chase down hornets down in the sky with a sledge blade, but that's not necessarily that difficult in the first place. So it it may actually be worth removing this, even if you are able to choose 3 perks from this suit, which at the moment would always normally happens when you choose dual melee. As for 2 perks, if I'm not going to suggest Gap Closer for 3 perks, I'm obviously not going to suggest it for 2 either, though it is a little bit better to have these 2 than than to have this on its own, I guess. I would generally recommend Quick Strike and Frenzy if you're able to take 2 perks from the melee suit and you want to get 1 perk from somewhere else. Frenzy is not strictly speaking going to make your time easier, but it does have some nice utilities. Sometimes you'll be able to get around a corner a little bit faster, and it will speed up your overall runs a little bit because you'll swing at something, and as you're running down the corridor, you've got 4 seconds of that 30% movement speed. Generally speaking, you'll want to be grappling, so the movement speed isn't actually affecting you, but in the cases when you aren't grappling, you'll get around a little bit faster, and sometimes that can make a difference, but it's not. I don't find it generally all that useful. Quick Strike, however, Quick Strike with particularly with the Sledge Blade, but also it's also nice to just minimize that duration that I've been talking about. It's very good. Quick Strike is the only thing that makes incinerators easier for melee weapons to deal with. It's it increases the it increases the time that you have to deal with something, is probably the best way to put it, because you are going to cover the distance that you need to get to it in a much shorter amount of time. So I think this is very good. So if you got 2, I would go for these 2. Though this is not the end of the world, especially if you were only using the Sledge Blade, because the Sledge Blade obviously gets a bigger effect from Gap Closer, and you aren't going to accidentally kill yourself because you lunged instead of parried with the Sledge Blade, because you're generally not going to be parrying with the Sledge Blade. Though it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. If you can only have 1, it really depends on what weapon you're using. If you were using the Sledge Blade, I would probably still recommend Quick Strike. As a single perk, it is very strong, and it will make the Sledge Blade much stronger. Whereas if you are using Fury's Edge, I'd probably recommend Frenzy, because Fury's Edge doesn't have particularly great lunges, though minimizing them with quick strikes is still good. But generally speaking, if you are using something and Fury's Edge, you are using Fury's Edge more for its defensive capabilities, where it can actually get parries but still be a weapon when you need it to be. And in those cases, having Frenzy so you can move around the map a little bit quicker, well, in combat situations you can move around the map a little bit quicker, it's pretty good. That would be my recommendation for 1. I think it kind of depends on what weapon you're using and what you're using it for. But either of these 2 perks are great. It's just this one that's kind of suspect, and I would not, as a single perk, 100% never choose Gap Closer. You would be much better off with Quick Strikes in like almost all cases. There, there's nothing that really needs a 30% lunge range that wouldn't also benefit from 45%, that wouldn't benefit more from 45% lunge speed. Like, that's generally speaking, this could just be replaced by grappling towards something. Anyway, that's all I have to cover on the Kamaitachi suit. Next week, I plan on looking at one of the weapons, probably the... I've already done most of those. Maybe the arc barrier? We'll look at the arc barrier, I think, next week. But until then, I shall see you then.